Am I supposed to be scared? Is this supposed to be spooky? Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Read, Share, Repeat, where we talk about books from the perspective of an aspiring fantasy writer. Me, Carrie Share. Well, today I've got a little bit of a fun video for you because I am doing my tier rankings for all 55 books I read to completion in 2024. I talked about most of these books on my other channel last year as I embarked on my journey to try and read 75 books, but some of them I didn't get a chance to talk about either because they weren't part of videos, or a few I snuck in right at the end of the year, or I was in the middle of a creative slump and wasn't filming. So some of these I've already talked about on the channel, and I will link as many relevant videos as I can. And so for that reason, I have ordered my tiers in a specific way that doesn't necessarily correlate to the star rating I gave each book. It's more to do with the feelings that the book gave me. So there might be some books that I only gave 3 stars, but they might be higher or lower than the third tier. So this isn't exactly a 1-for-1 ratio to my star rankings. All right, so taking a look at my tiers for this project, at the very top, we have Screaming, Crying, Throwing Up. These are books that I loved so much that it felt like my guts were being ripped out. I can't imagine a world where I didn't consume this piece of media. The second tier is Skipless, and these are books that I really, really liked, and I can imagine myself rereading, but they didn't exactly give me the screaming, crying, throwing up sort of feeling. The next tier is exactly what it says on the tin, and this tier is for books that didn't really surprise me in any way, either positively or negatively. Either I went in expecting to not like it, or I went in expecting to like it, and I got exactly what I thought I would get after reading. Then the second to last tier is I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed, and that kind of speaks for itself. These are books that I wanted to like, but for whatever reason, I just couldn't, and it was a bummer because I really did want to like them. And then the last tier is Screaming, Crying, Throwing Up, Derogatory, and these are books that I hated every bit as much as I loved the books in the first tier. Like I said, we've got 55 books here. They are sorted in alphabetical order, which I guess I will stick with because kind of nice randomization of my reading throughout the year. So first up is A Dark and Drowning Tide by Allison Saft. And this is a book that I read right at the end of the year, and I wasn't filming any more book content or any more vlogs for the year. And so it didn't get included in any wrap-ups or anything that I talked about. And I actually ended up really liking it. I had heard some kind of middling things about it, especially about the romance kicking off really suddenly and the plot not being very good, but I disagree. I liked the romance. I thought that the way that it built up was natural, and the way that it escalated towards the end. I liked the murder mystery. I liked the kind of central plot. That being said, it was not perfect. There were some things that kind of gave me the side eye. All of the characters on the expedition being childhood friends, except for the main character. Like, really, these are the most equipped people in the entire kingdom. There aren't any actual experts. They're all just fresh college graduates. Okay, whatever. And also, and this isn't a fault of the book, this is just a personal preference, I really do not care for storylines about religious trauma. In this book, the main character, Lorelai, is pretty obviously fantasy Jewish and faces a lot of fantasy anti-Semitism. While that is a perfectly valid part of the book, it's just not something I'm interested in, and it is kind of a turnoff for me. So I am putting A Dark and Drowning Tide in Skipless. Next up, we have A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, and this book really took me by surprise when I read it in September or August, because I had kind of put out a poll on my blog like a couple years ago about whether or not it was worth it for me to read, because I don't like YA. I just don't find young adult stories to be for me. I think it's perfectly valid for adults to read them. I just don't find myself engaged by them, and I'm actually kind of turned off by the more juvenile writing styles that tend to populate YA, and A Deadly Education was not that. I didn't think it read tremendously YA. It was more adultier YA, and I ended up really liking it. And I especially loved the themes of female friendship, and particularly the friendships that the main character Elle forms. Maybe it's because I just finished The Last Graduate last night and I liked it even more than A Deadly Education, but I am actually thinking I'm putting this in Screaming, Crying, Throwing Up, because I have been thinking about this book pretty consistently since I read it. This series has really taken me by surprise with how much I have loved it. A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. And this is a book that, what surprised me about this book is that I liked the romance. I actually was really down bad for the romance. The banter was so good in this book. The problem is as with most romanticises, the fantasy and like the actual plot outside of the romance really started to go downhill in the latter half of the book. It started off really strong and I was totally on board, but the author fell into this trap of making her character seem dumb as rocks in order to further the plot, because there's no other way that she could possibly stumble into the climax unless she is completely dumb and misinterpreting clues and context and whatever. And unfortunately, that not only was annoying as a reader, it also made the ending extremely predictable, because while the character was being dumb, I, as the reader, was picking up on the clues that she was not. And so the ending was extremely predictable and really sucked a lot of enjoyment out of the ending of the book for me. So I'm going to put this in exactly what it says on the tin, because I know in my experience with romanticises that the plots tend to be pretty simplified so that it can spend the effort it needs to on the romance. And I did like the romance part. Next up, we have A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. And this is a horror novel about a woman who is furloughed from her job. And so she comes home to stay with her mother while she waits to get back to work. And everything is not as it seems in this house. Something I unfortunately learned early last year is that I can't enjoy horror. It's just something about the way my brain processes the written word. I just don't imagine it very well. And I think that is kind of necessary to get a thrill from horror. And I just don't. It's just text on a page. It doesn't get my heart racing. I'm not like surprised or scared by any of the spooky elements. And so I can't enjoy horror as much as I want to. That being said, I went into this book knowing that. This was kind of later in the year after I had dabbled in horror a few other times and realized that it wasn't working for me. But I am kind of on this mission to read every book in T. Kingfisher's back catalog, and this was one that was available at the library. So this is also going to go exactly what it says on the tin, because I got exactly out of it what I expected to. A horror novel that didn't thrill me or scare me, but with really good writing that I already know that I enjoy with T. Kingfisher. Next up is A Master of Gin by P. Jelly Clark, and this is a steampunk fantasy in early 1900s Cairo, in an alternate world where jinn and other magical creatures have crossed the barrier between worlds and are now a living, functioning part of Egyptian society. And when you add in the murder mystery aspect of it, the premise is kicking. But that being said, I was just a little bit disappointed. This is a novel that I think is a companion to a short story that this author wrote with the same characters in the same world. And while no, I don't think you necessarily need to read that short story first, as I did not, I did feel it was a little too referential to it. Also, the ending was, again, predictable. So I did like it. I think I gave it 3 stars, but I was just a little bit disappointed because I was expecting it to go hog wild for it. Oh my God, we're already up to 16 minutes. Let's get a move on. A Tempest of Tea. I am not going to beat around the bush here. I am screaming, crying, throwing up derogatory. I hated this book. I hated it so much. And not just because I don't like YA, but because the author was really trying to make her main character a Kaz Brecker knockoff and failed in almost every respect, in my opinion. It was not good. I hated it. I will link you to my reading vlog of it so you can get more of my thoughts, but it was one of my worst books of the year for a reason. Next is All Systems Red by Martha Wells, and I loved this book. I loved Murderbot. I was mad at myself for not figuring out that I could start checking these books out from the library instead of just waiting for them to appear at my half-price books, because, oh my gosh, I loved it so much. I am going to put this in Skipless. Next up is An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. And I've talked about this a couple of times, but this is going in, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed because I am dreadfully disappointed to report that. I'm not going to say I didn't care for it. I just thought it was extremely boring and extremely forgettable. And that was a huge disappointment again, because I've heard so much positive hype around it, and I really do love Middle Eastern inspired fantasy. And so I was going into this expecting to love it, even though it is a YA. We'll do Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey, the first in the Expanse series. And I got everything that I wanted out of this. It's exactly what it says on the tin. I liked it. I liked the story. I liked the setting. I especially liked the hard science that the authors used to tell their sci-fi. What I didn't love was the characters. I actually hated both POV characters, and that ended up dropping the rating down to just a flat 3. With that said, it was exactly what it said on the tin. It was a good sci-fi book that I did end up continuing with Caliban's War, which is again exactly what it says on the tin. I knew one of the POV characters from the first book would be returning as a main POV, and I had heard that there is a broader cast of characters and POVs, and they are more enjoyable, and that did turn out to be the case. So Caliban's War actually got a 3.5, but it wasn't like mind-blowing, so it stays in exactly what it says on the tin. Next up, we have Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan, and this is a Chinese mythology-inspired fantasy about the eponymous Daughter of the Moon Goddess, who is on a quest to free her mother from her prison. She was imprisoned by the Emperor and Empress for a very mild offense, and so her goal is to basically become so strong and such an important asset to the military that she earns herself a favor. This book was a bit of a disappointment as well. Next up is Divine Rivals, and I read this right in the thick of the marketing boycott for Wednesday Books and its parent company that the name escapes me right now, so I didn't really talk about it too much when I read it. This is another book that took me by surprise with how much that I liked it. This one was really, really good. I'm going to put it in Skipless. Again, not perfect. In fact, I found it kind of goofy. Minor spoilers here. Spoiler alert, so you can come back. If you haven't read Divine Rivals, come back when this watermark is gone. But I found it really goofy that the main characters at the very end of the book are married and still calling each other by their last names. It just was so goofy to me that they are literally married and still calling each other by their last names. Anyway, spoiler off. And for that to be the one thing that I'm taking away from my experience with this book kind of tells you that it wasn't perfect, but I really did enjoy my time with it. Next up is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, and this is a romantasy, kind of romantasy, more fantasy than romance novel about a woman who is trying to complete her Encyclopedia of Fairies when her academic rival shows up and things go a little haywire. This is exactly what it says on the tin. It is very enjoyable, not a standout for me personally. Next up is episode 13 by Craig DeLuey, and this was my first brush with horror, and I was just disappointed. And it's not the book's fault at all. I listened to the audiobook, and it was a full cast with mixed media format, and it was very good. I was just like, am I supposed to be scared? Is this supposed to be spooky? Because for me, it wasn't. So again, I'm putting it in, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. And in this case, it's definitely not the book's fault. Next up, we have Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse. And this book was a ride. Fevered Star ended up having a little bit of middle book syndrome. It was very slow in certain places. But what got me was the ending. The ending not only changed my mind about one of the characters that I did not like from the first book and did not like for the vast majority of the second book. I was so completely just stunned and excited and like feverish for what was going to come next. At the time, Mirrored Heavens had not yet come out, but it completely flipped the script on this entire series for me. And for that reason, I'm going to put it in Screaming, Crying, Throwing Up, because that ending was so good. Next up, we have Foundryside, and this is also going in Screaming, Crying, Throwing Up, because not only does it feature one of the best, most unique magic systems I've ever read, it also had a twist near the end that actually took me by surprise. It all just worked for me. Every bit of it worked for me. And I want so desperately for a limited series to be made, because there was a certain scene in the first third of the book that was so cinematic to me. There was a fight scene in an alley. I could actually see everything happening. I actually love it so much that I haven't read the sequel because I'm afraid of how much I will love that one too. Next up is Godkiller, and this book, as well as its sequel Sunbringer, is actually going to both go in screaming, crying, throwing up, because I love them so much. The first book I did have some quibbles with, particularly with the characters. They were all just being butt munches at certain points in the narrative arc. But the plot, the setting, loved it. I especially loved how dense yet concise Hannah Kaner's writing is. It's not easy to cram a completely unique secondary world with this completely different system of gods and magic with 4 different POVs, actually see complete narrative arcs in less than 300 pages. Sunbringer, the sequel, I read a couple months later and loved even more. All of my quibbles about the character arcs were gone, and I just loved it. Highly recommend. Cannot wait to get my hands on Faithbreaker later this year. Next up is Grey Sister by Mark Lawrence, and this is the sequel to what has been my favorite book that I have read in the last 5 or 6 years, which is Red Sister. Red Sister kind of changed my life. It just really stuck with me and actually ended up changing my perspective on certain things. That being said, Grey Sister is exactly what it says on the tin. I love Red Sister so much that it was another situation where I was like afraid of how much I would love the sequel. It wasn't to the level of Red Sister, and it was just exactly what I thought it would be. I knew that I would love Mark Lawrence's writing. I knew I was invested in the characters. I knew that I liked the setting. So it ended up just being exactly what I thought it would be. Very, very good. And I did love it. Next up is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, and this is exactly what it says on the tin. Kind of similar to Emily Wilde, I had heard enough about this book to kind of get the broad strokes, and I picked it up because I just needed something fast and easy to read, and I did. I think I read it in less than a day, and it was cute. It's a cute fairy romance, a cute Regency fairy romance. Highly recommend if you're in a slump and you just need something cute and sweet. Hall of Smoke by H.M. Long. I actually think this is going in screaming, crying, throwing up derogatory, because while I was disappointed, I think I was more angry than disappointed. It's just how annoying this whole book played out. And it just was weird. It meandered. It didn't seem to know what it was doing or where it was going. And the ending was just stupid. I didn't like any part of it. Next up is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, and this is another YA that took me by surprise because I liked it. I actually really liked it. This is going to go in skip list because I wasn't necessarily in love with the Arthurian legend framework that the story is being told through, and I especially didn't love the setup of the love triangle in the last quarter of the book. And I did look ahead, and it is something that is explored more in the sequel, and it completely cauterized my excitement for the sequel. As much as I love Legendborn, I could honestly see myself just letting the rest of the series go. If you've read Bloodmarked and have thoughts on the love triangle, if you think it is something I should push through, knowing what I just said, let me know in the comments. Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher is exactly what it says on the tin. I know that I love T. Kingfisher's writing. I know that this is a dark fairy tale that also is kind of cozy, and I knew that I would like it, and I did like it. It didn't blow me away, but it was extremely enjoyable. I always loved T. Kingfisher. None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This is gonna go in skip list. This is a thriller, and I don't read a lot of thrillers. The plus side of this thriller is that the ending is pretty much told to you at the very beginning as a retrospective. This is told in mixed media format and follows the tumultuous relationship between these two women who meet each other on their shared birthday, and things just spiral out of control from there. But like I said, we're pretty much told what the ending is from the very beginning. So it did make the ending a little bit boring because there was no surprise to it at all. But I did like it. So I do recommend, but knowing that there isn't a twist at the end. One Dark Window. This is definitely, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Although I am kind of mad. Yeah, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. I really wanted to like this book. I really did. Fortunately, the main character was insufferable. She was just so stubborn and hostile to any new person who was actively trying to help her. She refused to trust or believe them or behave neutrally to them. It was active hostility, even after they showed repeatedly that they were on the same side and had good reasons to be on her side. She just was completely antagonistic the entire way through, and I wasn't about it. It made the book kind of a slog to get through reading from her perspective, and again, the ending was predictable. Next up is Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher, and this is actually going to go in I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. This is partially on me because I had really, really high expectations of this book. I read Sword Heart at the very, very tail end of 2023 going into 2024 and loved it. I love the world that it was set in, especially. And the Paladin series is also based in that same world. But unfortunately, I ended up feeling pretty neutral about the main male character and actively disliking the main female character. And I was not invested in their romance in the slightest. Did still enjoy the book on the whole because it's T. Kingfisher and it's the world of the White Rat. But the romance, which was the central premise, was just a letdown. So I was a little bit disappointed. This may come as a surprise, but I'm actually going to put Piranesi in I'm Not Mad, I'm Just Disappointed. Just a little bit though. It's probably at the top of I'm Not Mad, I'm Just Disappointed because, I don't know, I was just kind of expecting more from it. I did like it. I think I gave it 3 stars, but it was just not quite what I was hoping for. Next up is Paladin's Strength, and this is actually going to go in skip list. That may come as a surprise to you after Paladin's Grace, but Paladin's Strength, the couple was way better, in my opinion. The main female character has a special ability that was just fun, and I have a special affinity with because I had a D&D character many, many, many years ago that was almost identical to what she could do. This was a much better couple, in my opinion, and it just made the whole experience better. Queen of the Conquered. I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. I don't really know what I expected from this book, but I really ended up not jiving with the writing style because the main character has a magical ability to basically jump into other people's heads and read their memories and have a very limited amount of mind control over them. And so that meant that anytime she needed to know anything or anytime the author needed to tell us something, the character would just jump into someone's head and just download the information for us. And so that made it very, very telly and anti-showy, and I didn't like it. The craft of the book just didn't jive with me. Next up is Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft, and this is going to go in skip lists. I don't really know what I expected when I got this book. I heard that it was kind of strange and unique, and it was that, but it was banging. I don't know how to describe it to you. It's about this man and a woman who go on vacation to this immense tower called the Tower of Babel and almost immediately get separated and have no way of finding each other. And so this is about this man Senlin trying to find his way back to his wife when everything about this tower seems to be constructed to keep them apart. And I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to continuing the series. So Let Them Burn by Camilla Cole. This is a YA fantasy dragon story with a sapphic romance, and this is exactly what it says on the tin. If you're predisposed to like those things, you're probably going to like it. I actually really loved the characters of this book and thought that the plot was a little bit of a letdown. Exactly what it says on the tin. No huge surprises there. Same with Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. I read The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young earlier in the year, and that was a little bit of a disappointment because it was more magical realism than fantasy, and the author didn't take very much care to make sure that the details made sense. It's just sort of just go with it. A lot of it was if you think too hard about it, it all falls apart. And I unfortunately thought too hard about it. So The Unmaking of June Farrow was a disappointment. But knowing that, I went into Spells for Forgetting, knowing that It's more magical realism. You're not supposed to question it too hard. Just go with it. And so I did more with Spells for Forgetting and had a slightly better experience with it. It was just exactly what it says on the tin. The Bear and the Nightingale is, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. And this, because I was disappointed that I didn't like it. And it has everything to do with the writing style. We were in so many different characters' heads at different times, and I really like to feel closer to my characters in that. And also the religious trauma, as I mentioned before, not my favorite. There were hints at a romance between two characters pretty much from the very beginning that I was like, ooh, I'm not gonna like this. Next up is The Bone Orchard by Sarah A. Muller, and this is going in skipless. This is such a different kind of book about a necromancer courtesan who is tasked with finding her emperor's murderer and picking the next person to go on the throne. But she is just a brothel madam who happened to be the emperor's mistress and a necromancer. It was just good, and I really liked it, and I think you should read it. Next up is The City of Brass, which was exactly what it says on the tin. I had already read City of Brass and liked it less the first time, but I decided to go ahead and give it a second chance because I thought maybe the circumstances surrounding my first read through made me not like it as much as I could, and I did like it more. I still do have my complaints that one of the POV characters is so boring, it's like watching paint dry, and that my favorite character is kind of made into the villain at the end. The Children of Gods and Fighting Men is a historical fantasy about early 10th century Vikings and Ireland, and I am not a huge historical fantasy person, so it wasn't really the book's fault that I didn't get on with it. So it was exactly what it says on the tin. If you are a fan of that time period, and I do believe the main character was a real woman. Obviously this is a highly fictionalized version of her, but if that is your bag, you may like it. The Color of Magic, exactly what it says on the tin. A silly, goofy, fun time. This is the very first book in the Discworld series, and it was fine. The Court of Mortals. I am going to put this in screaming, crying, throwing up derogatory because of the ending. Ends on a trope that I hate virulently, passionately. While I would say I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed, I am mad. Disappointed and mad. Next up is The Girl in the Stars by Mark Lawrence, and this was exactly what it says on the tin. This is a YA fantasy novel in the same world as Red Sister and Grey Sister, which I love. I love that world so much. It is like a science fantasy setting, and it's just so cool. But this was a YA, and it was very heavily YA, which is the reason I didn't love it. It was not completely skipless, but I do want to continue with the series. Like I said, I love the world so much that I will read anything set in it. Next up is The Gilded Ones, and I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed because this is another YA fantasy. There were parts of it that I was really grabbed by, but the pacing was very, very strange, and I ended up just not caring anymore towards the end because it just seemed so long to come to the point. It was a little bit of a disappointment. The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher is skipless. And I know this may come as a surprise because it is a horror novel. Apart from it being a horror novel, it was very entertaining. It was just so entertaining with T. Kingfisher's writing style and the kind of quirky characters that she comes up with, and also the concept of the horror I was really into, even if I wasn't scared by it. I loved the concept of it. Definitely recommend this one. Next up is The Jasad Heir, and this is another big disappointment. Again, Middle Eastern fantasy should be my bag, and yet a lot of times they're disappointing me. Similar to The Ember and the Ashes, I don't remember a ton about this book. I do know that there is a competition, which felt completely meaningless. I do know there is an enemies to lovers romance, which felt fine, but forgettable. And there was something about the ending that I didn't like. I just can't remember. It's just forgettable, disappointing. The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick is skipless. The main ding against this book is its length. It is so long, but I love the setting. It's kind of Venetian style fantasy. I love the political intrigue, huge plus for me. I love the characters. I really liked the custom tarot motif, but as much as I loved it, I actually think it was completely cuttable and it would save on a lot of pages, to be honest with you. So I'm of two minds. I love it. I love the attention to detail and I love the thought and energy put into it, but it made the book was so long. And then I was just a tiny bit disappointed with the ending because like it looked kind of like one character was going to defy expectations and subvert some tropes, and then he just went off and did the opposite. So that was a little bit disappointing, but I still really liked it. I can't wait to complete it. The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. Where am I putting you, baby? This is kind of tough. Okay, so this is going to be like a really personal reason. I think I'm going to put it in Screaming, Crying, Throwing Up. Not because it completely shattered me in the way that the 5th season did, but because, first of all, it was the first like book series that I had completed, I think, since the Boy Wizard series that shall not be named. And also, it was one of the most satisfying endings I have ever read. Well, the book did drag. Like, there was a lot of it that it was just like, what are we doing here? Let's get on with it. Every single character got the ending I felt that they deserved. Every single one of them. And how often does that happen? Where every character got what I feel they deserved. And I was just so immensely satisfied. And it does cap off a series that began with one of the most perfect books, I believe, that has ever been written. The Rage of Dragons... disappointment. I've talked about this a few times. It was just extremely combat heavy and extremely repetitive, and it got really, really old really, really fast. And I was disappointed because I wanted to like it. I wanted to see more of the world, but the character was so laser focused on what he was doing in his plot that we didn't get to see anything else. It almost felt like the author was like, but here, what about this plot? And the main character was like, no, fuck that plot. Which is funny until you remember that the author is actually in charge the whole time. As an author, we can joke that the characters have a mind of their own, but it's up to you to do the editing. You can't give the main character that much control, if that's the case. Next up is The Tainted Cup, and this is going all the way in the tippy top of Screaming, Crying, Throwing Up. I gave this book a 4.5 star because Sherlock Holmes style characters tend to get on my nerves really, really quickly, and that was true in this book. However, I don't know how you can write a Holmes and Watson style murder mystery in a Attack on Titan style fantasy setting with a plant-based magic system? What the fuck? And a queer romantic subplot, and have it not be amazing. It was so good. I loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Highly recommend. If those buzzwords that I just mentioned don't get you to read it, then what are we doing here? Next up is Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher, and this is skipless. First of all, it is a dark fantasy retelling of Sleeping Beauty in T. Kingfisher's, of course, classic style, and what's not to love? And it's a novella, so you can get through it in like an hour. It's great. I love it. Highly recommend. Speaking of T. Kingfisher, we have What Moves the Dead and What Feasts at Night. What Moves the Dead was skipless. And I think it was skipless for me because even though I had read a book with a similar mechanic to it, and I can't even tell you what that book is because it'll spoil it, but even though I had read a similar book, The Fall of the House of Usher is one of my favorite Edgar Allan Poe stories of all time. And this is a retelling of it with a non-binary main character and T. Kingfisher's writing style. I highly recommend it. That being said, What Feast at Night ended up just being exactly what it says on the tin. I was actually hoping that it would be another Edgar Allan Poe retelling. I was kind of hoping that the main character, Alex Easton, would like have these series of novellas be about how they navigate these different Edgar Allan Poe stories. And it wasn't. What Feast at Night was just kind of a run-of-the-mill horror. I think it's based on like something from mythology, or folklore, but I was just like not about it. I was like, could you imagine Alex Easton like dealing with the Telltale Heart or something like that? I wanted that, but Oh well. A River Enchanted, I really expected to love after really liking Divine Rivals, but it ended up being a big disappointment. The writing style was completely different between the two books. In Divine Rivals, we were very, very close. We were very tight on the POVs of the two main characters. At River Enchanted, we skip around a lot more, and I didn't end up liking that style. I think I mentioned it with The Bear and the Nightingale, where I like to be much closer to my characters, and this just felt all over the place. I really did love the main character, Jack, but I also felt that he just sort of like, he had a grievance that I felt was very valid, and everyone just sort of dismisses or say, you misunderstood us, or we did it for these reasons, and it just completely like brushes aside like his very valid feelings, and that made me feel icky. And also I was just like not in love with the ending either. The Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. If you've watched my last couple of videos, you'll know this was screaming, crying, throwing up. I hated it. It was my worst book of 2024. I really hated the main character, Opal. She was just a bad person. And while unlikable characters are a thing, I don't think she was meant to be an unlikable character, but she was. She couldn't say her name without lying twice, and faced absolutely no consequences, even when she admitted in her narration to emotionally manipulating and abusing her brother, who she's the guardian of, and faces, like, again, no consequences, gets everything she wants at the end. I didn't like the romance. It was extremely ham-fisted, and the fantasy elements were very, very poorly integrated. It was just kind of a nonsense book that I hated. I just can't get over a character that lies so much and doesn't face any consequences for it. And she fucks over pretty much every character in that book, and it wasn't a fan. The Butcher of the Forest by Premi Muhammad is a horror novella, and it was just fine. It was exactly what it says on the tin. I forgot kind of what it's about. It's about like this enchanted forest where, like, if you go in, you don't come out. It's extremely dangerous, magic stuff. Our main character is the only person to have gone in and come out alive again. And she, at the beginning of this book, she's asked to do it again to rescue the king's children or emperor. But anyway, he's a tyrant and he is horrible, and he will kill her if she doesn't retrieve his children. So she has to go in and try and find them. And again, it was good, but like horror just, again, doesn't really get me. The City of Stardust by Georgia Summers. This is another disappointment, unfortunately. It started off really strong. I was really invested in the romance. It was just poorly executed and like just ill-conceived. And it just sort of like lost its way, I feel like. Or maybe it never had its way. There were elements that I liked, which I won't talk about here because it's a big spoiler, but it just like, it started really strong and then just dropped the ball after like the first 25%. The vibes were immaculate, but everything else was kind of shitty. Oh my gosh, we made it to the end. What the River Knows by Isabella Banez. And this might be controversial, but I'm going to put this in skip list, because while I do recognize and I do admit that there were some annoying bits about this book, particularly with the way that the main character is treated and is manipulated by pretty much anyone who knows her, and she doesn't ever win. She doesn't ever get a win. I don't know. I really, really empathized with her character. I really, really, really liked her. I will say that the comps of The Mummy and Death on the Nile are completely bonkers inaccurate. Not an adventure story. At least I didn't feel like it was a very good adventure story, and definitely not a murder mystery. But I still really liked it. And especially I really liked the main character. Your mileage may vary with this one because, like I said, there is very, very frustrating plot elements, and the main character is constantly, she has to like fight her way to attach herself to the plot pretty much. And I can see that as being frustrating. I can also see the character herself as being frustrating because she doesn't really learn her lesson. She is blinded by certain things in her past. But I don't know, I just empathize with her and I really liked her and I want her to win. I want her to get a win so bad. I have the sequel on my priority list for 2025. And that's it. Jesus Christ, it took me an hour to talk about all 55 books, but these are my tier rankings. A lot of books that were just fine, a lot of disappointments, but also a lot more in these top two categories than I expected. I think my average rating for the year was like 3.38, not super high. So I'm pretty pleased with the way that the tier rankings shook out. Let me know which of my rankings you agree with and which ones you think I should be canceled for in the comments. And with that, Thank you so much for watching. I so appreciate you. If you like my content and want to support the channel, please like and subscribe, or consider leaving a comment below. In my next video, I will have my first reading vlog of the new year for you. I hope you look forward to it, and I will see you then. Bye.